Wow, that was really good. I,
Yeah, super good Rex.
it reminded me a little bit of we interviewed Jason Everett a couple weeks ago.
I'm
Are you
sure.
familiar with him?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not well, but I know the name. Yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about the Chastity Project.
Okay.
Some of the things you were saying were echoing him. Have you read Dr. Carrie Gress's book, The End of Women?
I have not, but I need to. Yeah. She's a very powerful voice too.
Yeah, it's been every year. My wife and I and our kids, we write down our favorite book of the year and movie and things we've done, and just kind of reminisce over the year. And it was funny that this year, me and my wife both agreed on that book.
Oh wow!
But I'd highly recommend it. It was a really good book.
Okay, yeah, that's a good suggestion.
I'm definitely going to check out your book. You said Get Married.
Yeah, that one in the background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds really good. Gosh, there's so many things you said that just resonated with me. But one of the things that really stuck out was coming of age ceremonies. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is something that's become so, I don't know, like it's diluted. Like I feel like people aren't really acknowledging when they're happening. I don't know. Is there a reason why that's happened, or it just feels like people aren't crossing thresholds? You're just like, oh, this is just what you're supposed to do. And they do it rather than really appreciating it.
So I think, Rex, that we live in a world that's just much less collectively oriented and guided. And so I think it's just kind of difficult for a lot of communities to sort of exercise that social control that would be classically associated with having, like in the Jewish tradition, bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, in the Catholic.
Quinceañeras, like a Mexican
or confirmations of one sort or another. But if you look to obviously a lot of, tribes in Africa, they would have ceremonies for teenage girls and teenage boys to kind of usher them into adulthood, and they're, particularly for the men, there's like a questing thing. There's a kind of a difficult physical dimension to that. You got to sort of basically demonstrate your bravery. And then once you've done all that, you're welcome back into the community as an adult male, for instance. So I think, it's just a way of kind of helping young men, especially I think, to kind of make that transition. So, but yeah, in a more individualistic and a more affluent world, in a more secular context, these more traditional rituals have lost a lot of sway. And I think today, probably athletics and marriage too, still to some important extent, those two institutions kind of help people have a transition towards, in a sense, towards adulthood and towards greater responsibility. And obviously your first job or whatever, that can be, but it's just, we don't do as good a job of kind of, making these into rituals and ceremonies.
It seems to me that pop culture has really tried to make them not as important or something. Just I don't know if this is maybe a casualty of the egalitarianism or something. I mean, I don't want to really say that, but it just seems like those things aren't as important. When you said it, I was like, that does seem to be a really something that's missing, but is very important, is to kind of feel like you've reached a level. Like I've come to this point. I'm separated from my past or from this other group I used to be a part of. Now I'm part of a newer group that's, I don't know, something, but that's really important.
And I do think for young men, especially because I've been thinking about them a lot in the last couple of years, there is a way in which, I think there's a perceptive feminist, I think Jill Filipovich is her name. I don't know how to pronounce her last name, but exactly. But she was kind of arguing that too many men are not competent today. So they're not worthy of dating and marrying. And she was kind of blaming the men for their situation in life. And I kind of, there are a bunch of us like Richard Reeves as well, who would sort of say, well, let's interrogate that a little bit here, right? Why don't we? Like, is it just sort of an accident that there's a whole class of young men out there who are, not flourishing in school, not going to college, not working full time, not being that helpful around the home? Or might there be some deeper, cultural and economic reasons this is all happening? And so I think, we would particularly benefit from figuring out a way to kind of usher teenage boys through a series of rituals and challenges, and then tell them at the end of the process, like, you're a man and here's the sort of plan. Like, this is what you've got to do next to kind of like basically be a good man. This is what masculinity means in a pro-social way, not an Andrew Tate way. And we don't do that. And then we wonder why some guys gravitate towards someone like Tate, who offers a very clear script about what it means to be a man, but not a one that's generally good for them.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of poisonous is what he's doing.
Right. But he's operating in a vacuum too often, right? Where we don't publicly speak in our public schools and universities and mainstream media about, or even in many social circles, about what we would expect in a pro-social way of men that's distinctively male. And then we're surprised to find that, a lot of our younger guys are not measuring up.
Well, I watched something the other day about the Boy Scouts of America, and as you're talking about this, I'm like, that used to be something that was kind of pro male, and like, this is what you do, and kind of some ceremonies and reaching some a point of independence.
Right.
I remember when I was a teacher many moons ago, I remember asking my students, I'm like, why are you at school? And they would always, the number one answer I always got was, I'm here so I can make good money when I get older. And I'm like, the real reason you're at school is to learn to be independent, to be productive parts of society that are independent, that can produce rather than consume more. And a lot of them would just look at me like I was crazy. And I forgot why I'm even threading that into this, but I think, Boy Scouts of America or these other rites of passage, I think would kind of help people to kind of realize that function of being productive rather than consumption. I really like, you said this earlier, and it's something that's going to stick with me, and I'm going to put it to use in my marriage and with my kids, but is being a father that shows a kid, or a son at least, how to be a good husband, and how to be a provider and a protector. And these are the things you're supposed to do as a man, and be responsible. Thank you for sharing that little nugget right there, and a nice little bite-sized piece, because that, I think, will have an effect on a lot of people.
Right.
I took a lot of notes, but I really enjoyed this.
Yes.
Like you said earlier, to accept life is not perfect, and I think that is something that is affects a lot of people, where they just like, my life, I'm not happy, so now I can just move on.
Right.
Can you speak to that just a little bit more?
So one thing I talk about in the book is what I call the soulmate myth. And it's kind of this idea that there's going to be one person out there who gives you kind of a perfect sense of connection, and where you have kind of an intense emotional tie with them, where things are regularly romantic. And so there's kind of like this idea that marriage should be frictionless, right? And that it should be perfect. And, it's just sort of happily ever after, obviously, is a sort of classic Disney-esque kind of formulation here. And that, of course, that perspective is really counterproductive, because, any kind of long-term relationship is challenging, hard, disappointing, conflictual, all that kind of, more difficult stuff. And so I think the challenge that too many people have when it comes to sort of navigating married life today, in part, is that they expect it to be too romantic and too frictionless, and they don't know how to handle periods when things aren't so romantic, and also times when there is more conflict between them and their spouse.
That's well said, and I agree with that. That a lot of, especially postmodern culture, is really always trying to avoid any type of discomfort or suffering, in a sense. Whereas those things actually test us and make us better and help us build better connections. There's one more thing I wanted to comment on that you said. Oh, I liked your. It's so obvious, but I don't, I think so many people could miss it. Is like when married couples go on dates, do something that's special to you and your wife. That's not something exactly you share with the children, but just something for you.
Right.
Can you speak to that a little bit more? Because I thought that was excellent.
I think that the main extra thing that I would say is just sort of the importance, and this is something that I must confess I don't always do a good job with myself, right? But novelty. So
Novelty.
I want on the one hand kind of minimize this idea that marriage is just about romance, but I also don't want to fall into the trap of arguing that it's not about romance, right? And so I think what we see is the couples who engage in novel activities for their date nights, or even family, activities as well that are more novel, I think tend to experience more romance in their marriage, just because there's just something about doing new things with your spouse that kindles that sense that, you're discovering new terrain together. You're experiencing new dimensions of your relationship, and that seems all to help, foster that more romantic connection. So the novelty piece, try to figure out fun things that'd be new for you to do as a couple. That's advised.
I have one last question if we have time.
Sure, go ahead.
How did you get into this? What sparked your interest and drive to become a marriage expert and the importance of marriage in just culture and civilization as a whole?
So yeah, just being raised by a single mom, and then, growing up and not having a father in the home, and then sort of seeing marriage as an institution. This is kind of my insight in college. That connects men to their kids. So that was kind of like the genesis of my interest in this topic.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're doing it. It's awesome.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, thanks so much, Brad.
No, thank you, Dave and Rex and Liz. Yep.
That's it for me. You guys have any follow-ups or?
No.
Your mom just sounds impressive. Do you write about her much?
I've a little bit in the book. And yeah, my mom, she was, she's really soldiered on, all these years. But she was a strong, independent, single mom. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
She did a beautiful job.
Wow.
Just a good man.
Yeah, she did.
Excellent.
Thanks for joining us today. Hey, do us a favor and take a second to subscribe to our podcast and the Utah Marriage Commission YouTube channel at Utah Marriage Commission, where you can watch this and every episode of the show. Be sure to smash the like button, leave a comment, and share this episode with a friend. You can also follow and interact with us on Instagram at Stronger Marriage Live and Facebook at Stronger Marriage. So be sure to share with us which topics you loved or which guests we should have on the show next. If you want even more resources to improve your marriage or relationship connection, visit strongermarriage.org, where you'll find free workshops, e-courses, in-depth webinars, relationship surveys, and more. Each episode of Stronger Marriage Connection is hosted and sponsored by the Utah Marriage Commission at Utah State University. And finally, a big thanks to our producer, Rex Polanis, and the team at Utah State University, and you, our audience. You make this show possible. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Utah Marriage Commission.